Hey y'all, I'm Ryan.
And I'm Nancy. And this is Sci-T, where we bring you engaging conversations between researchers and practitioners.
We feature leading experts as well as early career researchers in psychology and beyond, who will be speaking with other professionals working in settings such as hospitals, schools, and governmental agencies.
So grab your tea
or drink of choice
and enjoy the conversation. Welcome to Sci-T. I'm Nancy Weinberger.
And I'm Ryan Brown.
We're so glad you're here today. I'm going to introduce our first guest. Leah Deffenbaugh is STEM Outreach Manager of SciGirls. SciGirls is a television show and outreach program out of Twin Cities PBS. SciGirls aims to change how girls see the world and how the world sees girls. Leah develops and implements STEM programs, that's science, technology, engineering, and math, for schools, museums, and after-school programs. Her goal is to ensure that youth from all backgrounds have access to engaging and relevant STEM learning opportunities. Welcome, Leah.
Thanks, Nancy. It's nice to be here.
And I'm so excited to introduce Dr. Barb Billington, who's an instructor, researcher, and writer for SciGirls, which is a Twin Cities PBS project that encourages girls to get involved in science, technology, engineering, and math. She teaches at the University of Minnesota in the College of Education and Human Development and supports pre-service K-12 teachers to incorporate student-centered, culturally relevant, gender equitable, and inquiry-based science practices in their daily teaching. Her goal is to guide teachers to provide equitable teaching practices throughout the Twin Cities metropolitan area and beyond. And she's also assisted in the development of a gamified app, which is designed to help students understand cellular respiration and photosynthesis. And all of this is why we're so excited to have Dr. Barb Billington here today.
Thanks so much, Ryan. It's really nice to be here.
That's fabulous. Well, we're going to start off with a little bit of a description of the study that Ryan and I put together and connects to the work that you both are doing. And we'll just do a little bit of an overview about that, and then we'll jump in and we have questions for each of you. So Ryan, can you fill us in a little bit?
Yeah, definitely. This project is so close to my heart in a lot of ways. I'm sure we'll talk about that more in a little bit. But the main goals of the study were to examine the implicit associations and explicit gender or attitudes that people have about people, and especially women in counter-stereotypical careers. And this is why we used one of the SciGirls videos, which was so key to the study and how we started just really, like I said, fangirling over SciGirls in general. So we were able to sort of use one of these videos and ask kids, 58 kids before and after watching these videos, what they thought about the characters within the video. And one was a firefighter named Kate, who was sort of the counter-stereotypical career that we were focusing on of this firefighter. And so we found overall that explicit gender attitudes were really flexible, which is really exciting. And we also took away the importance of these counter-stereotypical examples, because it sort of just shows that kids can watch a video like this, like these SciGirls videos, and really think positively about a firefighter who is a woman without discounting her in leadership positions or anything else. And we, on the flip side, we did see that there was still a lot more rigidity for some careers, like being a ballet teacher for boys, than there was for other careers, like being a doctor for girls or boys. And so this comes back to some of the limitations for young boys as well, right? And so what really excited us about this study was getting to map on both these implicit associations, explicit attitudes, and use this really relevant stimulus of a SciGirls video. And we can totally see a lot of implications from the study, and just are looking forward to digging into these today with some questions that we have for y'all. And of course, we hope that you feel free to ask each other questions, and we're just thrilled to have y'all here today.
Yeah, that's so true. We are. It's just really great kind of coming back and having this conversation after being able to use one of these episodes as a really essential part of our study. And we it felt really good when we were writing up our, like in not only the methodology and mentioning Sci Girls in the episode, but coming back to it in the discussion and saying, hey, this is an example. We want to have representation, and Sci Girls gives us this representation in a way that is really engaging and interesting. And so it's really nice coming back with you guys. So maybe we should just sort of start off with basics, and maybe Leah, you can tell us a little bit about like what does a Sci Girls program look like, and maybe a little bit about the audience, and is it for girls? Is it for girls and boys? Maybe you can tell us some more.
Sure. So Twin Cities PBS is the TV station where I work in Minnesota, and we have been doing STEM TV programming for 30 years, and sort of our model is we're often funded by government grants like the National Science Foundation, and as a lot of you might know, a lot of that is really heavy in research. So our model is make something interesting that's useful for kids, research it, see what's interesting about it, and then adjust. So the way Sci Girls came about 10 or 11 years ago, and Barb can talk a little more about this, is there was a show called Dragonfly TV that some of you might remember if you're in your 20s, and it was real kids, real science. And there was a study that we did, not me, I wasn't here yet, but that we did on a girl-focused episode. It was just girls who were doing this experiment. And what we found was very similar to the study that you're talking about, in that girls reacted more and felt more that they could be and identify with the people in that particular segment. The sort of, if you can see it, you can be it type of thing. So we took that and went, okay, so what does that look like? What does that mean? And if we're going to make things for girls, what are the different tenets of that? How do we know that we're actually making something for girls? So several seasons later, and Barb can talk about the research behind this because she's been an amazing part since the beginning, but we call ourselves girl-centered and boy-focused, in that we try to create television and outreach and activities that really keep STEM equity in mind. So things like bringing in role models, making sure there's a growth mindset, structuring group work in a way where everyone has a specific role and can feel like they're contributing in a way that's good for them, things like that. And then you can see that both in our television show, which is for middle school audience, in our role model videos, the one you used is for a high school audience, but it's really K-12. And then in our activities, which I think we'll link you to eventually. So our goal is really STEM for all, and STEM that's representative of young people as they look today and as they feel and act today.
That's really helpful. I mean, I think that kind of programming that you're talking about doesn't disempower anybody. It doesn't put a boy at a disadvantage. It just is a different orientation and a different aspiration for children generally. Leah, you had mentioned that Barb could give us maybe some more backstory to some of the research of the origins, and we'd love to hear about that.
Sure. Thanks, Nancy. So I was a grad student at the University of Minnesota back in 2008, 2009, when my advisor got a request that was sent around, I'm sure, to institutions around the metro area from Twin Cities PBS. And they were looking for an intern to do some work on gender equity stuff. And I knew it was called Sci Girls, but I didn't know anything about it at the time. And I have to say, studying gender equity in science is why I went into grad school. So that's another story for another Sci T. But my whole focus was really thinking about my high school kids and the choices they made for the classes that they got, and learning during my master's that like girls were being ushered out of science careers in high school by well-meaning counselors and parents, and boys were being ushered in by well-meaning counselors, parents, and teachers, right? So anyway, I started in 2009 as an intern, and the rest, as Leah has said, is history. I have not left. But as I've continued to grow and develop as a teacher educator, I've thought a lot about and read a lot and done some research on the best strategies that show up and help girls identify and feel part of the framework of STEM and being a science-minded person. And so back in 2009, we did a full literature review at the time, read hundreds of articles, narrowed it down to like 100, and found that there were these 7 themes that kept coming up in the research, 7 reasons that girls could identify themselves as being a participant in science. And I should say in 2008 and 9, the literature really wasn't talking about STEM participation yet. We were really still focused on science or math or, not even technology and engineering so much at that point. So we really were focused on science. And then we did a reboot. We hit the literature again in 2013 and then again in 2018. So we've got about a decade now of having gone back to look at the literature. And it has shifted a little bit in the last 10 years since we did that original work, or I guess it's now longer than 10 years, right? And so there's been some modifications. And if you look at our resources, and I know that Leah has already shared the link to the scigirlsconnect.org website, but there is a lovely downloadable PDF with the 6 strategies. And these are well backed up in the literature by numerous researchers across the nation and in lots of different situations, both in school, out of school learning. We've looked more broadly at from elementary through post-secondary students as well, to really get a sense for how the literature might indicate differences that might happen in those different age groups or different populations. So yeah, that's just a base, I guess.
I want to follow up on that because I was really curious if you find like a particular age group is ideal for targeting, or just differences with what age group you target and how effective those measures are.
Oh my gosh, Ryan, that's a great question. And it's the question that we're constantly asking ourselves and asking educators. And what the literature says now is it sort of falls out in late elementary, early middle school is the best time to be targeting girls, because it's the time in their lives where they're starting to decide what kind of girl I want to be or I think I am. And so 5th grade, 6th grade, 4th, 5th, 6th is really sort of, I hate to say the best time to do it because it's not the only, that's for sure. But it is the time when girls are transitioning out of an elementary school where they've been sort of in these protective homeroom classrooms with a single teacher most of the day, maybe a science specialist teacher and a social gym teacher and an art teacher doing some special things, but largely being influenced by that one adult on a full day basis. But they're also beginning to look at their peers and really look to see, and this is developmentally normal, right, for boys and girls and anyone along any part of that binary, to really be thinking about who they are. They're comparing themselves to peers. I'm more of a science person than, I'm less of a science person than, right? Or math person or a writer or reader, right? Like they start labeling themselves, and frankly, we as adults do this labeling as well. So that's a really influential time. When I say that to my high school science teachers, and as you mentioned, I work with pre-service teachers at the University of Minnesota, when I tell them that, they think like, well, it's too late, right? Like I've missed the window. I'm not going to be able to do any work around this. And that's not true. We got to keep a growth mindset around that, as Leah mentioned. But for some girls, it will be too late. that it will be very hard for some girls to change their minds in a chemistry class if they're struggling to think, yeah, I can become a chemist or I can become a scientist, if it's something that they really cannot overcome some of those difficulties. So that, again, using the strategies in the classroom can really help assuage some of that and help girls identify themselves as being someone who is good at science. But it's as you've read and research as well, the social impact of that is of who is a scientist and who isn't is very strong.
And I'm just going to pop in and say from the practitioner side, how this ends up. Our TV show takes middle school girls, pairs them with role models and mentors to solve STEM problems. So one of my favorite shows, for example, they make an ice cream bike. This is a pretty old one now, but they decided to take a bicycle and figure out if there was a way that they could make a contraption that goes on it that you put all the ingredients in the beginning, and at the end you get ice cream, which just seems like the best bike ride in the world. But then as we're creating outreach programs, what we've found is that middle school space, and I'm getting a little iffy with middle school, 10 to 13 is usually where we target. But that middle school space, there are a lot of people and organizations who really, really, really want content, and especially STEM content. Mm-hmm. And what we try to do is look at this literature that Barb is working on, and we have a team that works on it, and saying, okay, where are those holes? For example, a few years ago, we had a program called SciGirls Code, because what we found was that, you know, in middle school coding classes, a lot of the boys had come in with a set of knowledge the girls hadn't, or in high school. So the girls are automatically behind, and girls do tend more than boys to just say, I'm channeling Barb here, but to get a B and say, that's terrible, I give up. Whereas boys get a B and say, that's awesome, I did it. This is, of course, not all boys, not all girls, not all kids of any gender, but these are the trends we see. So we created a coding program focused on girls, only for girls or gender nonconforming youth, so that they could have time to practice, fail, get both those skills and that understanding of how do I work through this problem, so that by the time they get to that stage, where they're in the classes with kids of all genders, they can go, oh, okay, I get it now. I might not understand this problem, but I can work through it, instead of, I might not understand this problem, so I'm stupid and I can never do this. So that's our goal. That's how it works out in the real world.
That's awesome. And I just want to come in with like my own little anecdote here, because I'm as you're saying that, I'm remembering taking the only like computer science, the class that I took in middle school, high school was in high school. And I had that exact experience that you're saying. And I'm remembering that the only thing that made me feel like, okay, this is something that I've been slightly exposed to was HTML for Neopets websites and things like that. Like that was the only, before, if I hadn't had that little bit of experience when I was like 10 years old and being so into like wanting my Neopets profile to be just like a little bit more flashy or whatever, that was sort of the only like frame of reference that I had to come back to. And I think I felt a lot of the like, oh, is this actually for me thing within that, even having a little bit of minimal exposure to that as a kid. So I think that's a really, really valuable point there about the coding specifically, because it can be so intimidating just to look at to begin with.
And Ryan, what you did there is you exactly explained the first SciGirls strategy, which is connect STEM experiences to girls' lives. Yeah. What you connected to was Neopets. And so you decided that it was worth it to you to learn this new skill, to do something you're interested in. So I really, really love that example.
I also
It's
think,
perfect.
yeah, I also think that it connects, even though you might have done that on your own, connects to the fact that the outreach work isn't just in schools, that it's, in museums and after school programs. And Leo, you mentioned, institutions that need content. After school programs need content, rich content. And it is a place, there's more freedom for kids, I think, there. And so then maybe there's more freedom in the outreach. Are the programs different when they're, in the different settings? And how does that work?
They really are different when they're in different settings. We try to strike a balance between prescribing what folks should do and then giving them a lot of options, because we know that in some places they do have some very rigid things they have to get done, and in other places they don't. But both like the kids and the experiences they come with, the educators and the experiences they come with, and sometimes my favorite educators to work with in some after school programs are educators that are hesitant about STEM, because it's really fun to make those connections, and then everyone, including me, is learning. And then we work to create programs. The best programs that we create are programs that we create with our partners, because they know their kids and they know their site, and we can't. Right. And so we work with them to say, okay, how much time do you have for STEM? What are your folks excited about? What are your kids excited about? Where do you think your growth areas are? And then we'll figure this out. And that, like you said, is great. The freedom of after school programs is amazing. And the ability to turn on a dime and say, oh, the kids really responded to this, let's do more like this, is amazing as well. And I think that if it all goes right, does help them in the formal school environment to connect back to, oh, right, I did this at my Boys and Girls Club site, or something like that.
Right. It would be safer. It would feel safer because they did it in their Boys and Girls Club or some other place. Yeah.
And then a lot of the really nice thing about some of the staff that may be more hesitant is that you can then, they are amazing at youth development, so they can model those skills for the kids. They can model not knowing and asking questions and solving STEM practices at the same time, because they are changing their own STEM identities as the kids are changing them as well. So it's a really, really fun project to watch, and I learn a lot from the youth workers that I work with.
And then I was just going to add, Leah, I think another thing that we see when we talk to the different programs that you've and other folks at TPT have worked with is that some programs are a summer-long program, some's a week-long camp, some is just a weekend overnight thing, or sometimes it's a Girl Scout troop, or maybe it's just a one afternoon, it's a one-off. For the informal sorts of teaching, and that makes it very different, and what kinds of level of work you think you can do as an educator, and what you can expect of the girls or the kids that you're serving and working with. So that has been another thing that we've been really, I think, responsive to, and tried to really help those trainers and educators in those spaces, because frankly, if you have kids for 3 hours, you can't do all 6 strategy, right? Like maybe you show a role model video and you reflect on that and some other things, but right, like there's not going to be lots of chance to practice all of this. So,
and what we then request is that these programs tell us what went well, what didn't go well, and we will adjust both programs and activities based on that. For instance, I went into, this is adults, but I went into a conference session with a neuroscience activity where you might have done it, where you drop a ruler and then someone else catches it and you see your reaction time. And I was doing that and I had it all written out. I was all excited to do it. I got there and one of the participants was deaf. And that is when I realized every single piece that I had written was for someone who was hearing. Every single piece of the activity. So because of that real world information that all of our partners give us, we can go back and do it better because they are the experts in their communities and we need to be responsive to that.
I mean, I love the fluidity that you have to have a certain amount of flexibility, or it fits within your goals to be able to be flexible and change, and you're adapting. And earlier, Barb, you were talking about the sort of the history of what of getting to this point and looking at the research. And if children are changing over time, then at the very least you want to make sure that the programs are changing. I think that's great.
And I think one of the best parts of the design of the program is that, as Leah's intimating, like our partners are in the programs across the nation are part of the whole process from beginning to end, right? So we have a meeting early on, we train some trainers so that they can go out and train educators in their own sites. Those trainers then become experts who we rely on, as Leah's mentioning, to give us feedback on what's working, what's not, but also to come and inform our practices back in St. Paul so that can go out and be disseminated to everyone. So it's been this beautiful back and forth, and I don't know, Leah, you probably, it's like a love fest when we get together. Like, oh my gosh, I haven't seen you. So glad that you're here all the way from Texas, right? And, oh, she's from California and we did this project, right? And then it's just this really synergistic time where we always walk away from a 2-day meeting with our partners just beaming and feeling like we've done great good, right? And we're just talking to the adults. We're not even working with the kids.
It's a love fest, and they also challenge us. Mm-hmm. And I've been in many conversations with some of our superstar partners where they say, okay, I tried this and I think this should be different. I think you should add this. I don't understand why you do this. And that's fantastic because we send things out to local classrooms or local places to test, but we don't know, we're in Minnesota. We don't know how it's going to be with a group in a museum in Louisiana. So getting people who will challenge you, I think, is one of the best ways to create a sustainable program of any educational program.
That's great. Ryan, do you want to jump? If you don't want to jump in with a question, I have a question for you, Ryan, but maybe you want to jump in with a question.
Well, I just wanted to go back to, I think Leah was talking about this, and I'm just curious how you're maybe adapting materials to more reflect gender nonconforming youth, or go ahead. Yeah, that's one thing I was just thinking about with the materials that we saw years ago, and just curious.
It's a good question. It's an ongoing process. Yeah. I'll start, and then Barb, you can jump in because I know that you talked about this a lot when you were creating. I'll hold it up again, the SciGirl Strategies booklet that you should all download. We encourage, so we've changed all of the places except for the research-based places where they researched girls. So they researched a very specific identity, and we need to keep that. So we changed it to youth so that we can do that. We are making steps, like one of our role model, you use the Kate Heckman role model video. We just finished about a year or two ago our first trans role model video, which is amazing. Her name is Aubrey, and she is a coder and a yoga instructor, and she's fantastic. But these are ongoing conversations that we have. Even the name SciGirls, we are talking about, does that resonate with young people anymore? Does that resonate with how they describe their gender identity? What language can we use to make sure that we are inclusive? and that we're respecting everyone's gender identities. So we have a lot of those conversations, and we don't have all the answers yet. I think that we'll continue to adjust as things come in. And as for now, depending on the program, if it's a program that in the past would be for girls, we talk about how it is for girls and gender nonconforming students. If it's an all genders program, great. Things like that, but we are continuing to learn, and I'm not going to pretend we have all the answers. Barb, how did that go when you were doing your literature review in 2018?
Yeah, so that was definitely something we were specifically looking for research on. And frankly, when we did the reading and the writing in 2017, 18, 19, very, very limited research on gender nonconforming trans kids. I mean, in STEM, like it's just the literature is just not there. There are some studies, limited studies. And so, yeah, we really, this is one of those, I think, chicken and egg stories, right? Like, do we wait for the research and the publications of that educational research to catch up with the culture, or the other way around, right? Again, we don't have the answer for that. So I think even prior to considering the spectrum of gender, when we first started thinking SciGirls and doing SciGirls work and the outreach back in 2010, 11, we were getting some pushback from partners saying, but I run a boys and girls club, or I run a, all genders camp in the summer, so I don't want to use just SciGirls. What about the boys? So what about the boys became a question that we heard from our partners a lot, and felt the need, and we should, to respond to that. And so when we went back to the literature in 2013, what we noticed is, and this was present in 2008, but I think we were not looking for it as hard, let's say, as we did in 2013. And that is the strategies, the 7 original strategies and now 6, like all of them are good for kids, right? It's just good teaching, things that are relevant. Like Leah's already mentioned around the Neopet example. And in my house, it was the, we're going to get the little plushie that you got to play with online, Webkins. That was our big tech support thing. But yeah, so it turns out like all of these strategies working collaboratively, right, is good for all kids. Being able to use the scientific practices of looking at data, analyzing data, and explaining our thinking. All of these things are good strategies for all kids to learn science and to feel confident in science and to build their own identities in science and STEM. But the one strategy that really stands apart and seems to, in the literature, be supporting more support for girls is the last one. That's role models. Number 6, the one where you building a relationship with a role model and learning more about how a person like you identifies as a STEM person. And so like watching the Kate firefighter video, which I had to watch again because it's been a while since I watched it. I love that video. Plus it's in St. Paul where I live. Woo, woo. So I'm like, hey, that's my neighborhood. Anyway, yeah, there are so many good videos. Some of my favorites are, there's a bicycle engineer. Love her. I mean, she's designing bikes to fit different body shapes. I mean, I love that. There's so many good ones. But the role model piece, and we don't quite understand why the data or the research tells us that this is so beneficial for girls. And there's just not a lot of data saying that it's beneficial for boys. But our thinking is the boys already have enough STEM role models, right? So I don't know that there's a lot of research that says that, but they're just everywhere, right? Bill Nye the Science Guy, Albert Einstein. Like if you were to ask 10 friends, and I do this often, I get kind of the nerdy glance from my friends, but I'm like, tell me 10 men that you know are famous in science, right? And they can list off these 10 people really quickly. And I'm like, okay, 10 women. And they're like, Marie Curie. I'm like, how about one who's alive today? And they're like, oh, right. It's harder to do because they're just not in the news. It's not prevalent. So yeah, so I think I lost my train of thought there. But the gender nonconforming students and kids that don't identify as girls are still benefiting from so many of the strategies, but the literature, right, doesn't talk specifically about kids who identify as nonconforming or trans.
And so
Right.
as we're creating these role model videos as well, if you can take a peek, insert plug here of our role models page on SciGirls Connect, but we try to run the gamut as far as intersectionality. We try to get a wide range of people who have, who identify with multiple races or ethnicities, religions, to some extent gender identities, though we're not there yet with that, sexualities, sexual orientations. And so that whoever is looking at this, whoever is a girl or a trans or gender nonconforming youth is looking at this can say, oh, right, that person, as they're talking about their life, I see similarities to my life. Another thing that we try to do is, look at socioeconomic status. Are we only creating experiences where people live in houses? Are we looking at apartments? Are we looking at jobs that pay a wide range? Or are we only looking at the jobs that pay 100,000 plus? And creating a way for young people, whoever they are, wherever they are, to begin to look at that path and understand that that's a path that they could take. Not necessarily that they would, but to see themselves in the people that we work with.
And that there, as you're saying, Leah, multiple paths. It's not one path to become a successful science person, right? Or a STEM person.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say after that first series of videos, another series that came out was looking specifically at teenage girls, so high school and early college age girls who were not yet in their careers, but they're studying science and STEM. And so that was more of a near peer sort of role model as opposed to a grown up with a family and so on, or a partner, which is harder, I think, for some girls to imagine. And then there's a whole series that are all in Espanol. And so they're dubbed in or subtitled in English, and it's just lovely to have bilingual and Spanish-speaking women telling their stories as well. So again, all these different ways of identifying, and we haven't hit on all of them, but hopefully we'll continue to get grant money and do the work. So
that'd be great. I mean, one of the frustrations that Brian and I had in trying to design our study is that we were very limited in what we were able to show kids because of, the limited time that we would have with them in a study. And so we couldn't do this broad representation, but to give you guys a shout out in our discussion saying that, we can tell that you are trying to do this kind of broader representation. And I think that that's really important. And I think that it's not just important for those people who kind of align up and say, oh, that's kind of like me. I think it's for everybody else, because if a boy sees a woman doing something, then hopefully they're less likely to dismiss their sister or the girl in the classroom to say, you want to do that? It's like, oh yeah, she can do that. Well, so then she can do that. So I think that having that message for everyone is not going to take away from anyone, and will actually help broadly.
And I really love the different topics that you are talking about highlighting with people too, because I think a lot of times, like when I see gender nonconforming people doing research or being highlighted for doing research, it's often because they're doing research on their identity. And I think that it's really nice that just to be able to highlight gender nonconforming trans people doing science that isn't necessarily focused on their identity, just to say, like, you can do any of these things, right? And really highlight the breadth of that beyond just the benefit that having a trans or gender non-conforming person involved in that kind of research is obviously important, but that doesn't mean that if you are trans or gender non-conforming, you have to go into this specific line, because you're even if you're interested in your identity and everything else, right? There are so many different paths still.
And I'm going to bring us back a little bit, because I don't know how everyone on this panel identifies, but I'm kind of looking at us and I'm like, I don't know how much diversity there is here, just to be perfectly honest.
Yeah, I know.
So as we, and this is also still a work in progress, not pretending we're the experts, but as we are looking at some of the episodes we create, some of the role models that we profile, we make sure that the camera crew identifies like different people on the camera crew, and things identify in a wide range of ways that are important and connect to the person that we're filming. We make sure to get an advisory board that is made up of people who come from a big, diverse set of experiences. We try to hire and give decision-making power to people who have diverse sets of experiences. And again, not at all pretending that we've succeeded, because I don't know if you ever succeed, you just keep working. But it doesn't stop with who is in front of a classroom or who is in front of a video camera. It needs to be every piece of the process, not just the end product.
Mm-hmm.
I really love that. And one of my good friends in grad school is doing a lot of work just around like the composition of teams, and just emphasizing how that like surface level team diversity can make such a difference in the novel ideas and everything else. And just, getting the empirical data to really back up the diversity within teams and how much of a difference it can make. And so I think that's a really good point that you brought up.
Mm-hmm. And then also, from my position, what's been tough for me is learning when to sit down and be quiet and say, oh, I don't know what I'm talking about. You're right, which is hard, but essential. So that's, kind of the journey we're on.
And you probably can see how that is something that is happening with the kids that you are working with too. That they, obviously if we're still practicing it, they need to practice it as well. And how do we give girls voice without saying it's only just being about it's your turn? Are there other things that we can do so that they feel it is their turn and they can speak up? I mean, I think that makes them have a greater sense of ownership over the material as well.
Yeah, Nancy, that is such a huge thing that happens every week in my class, right? So I'm working with pre-service teachers when I'm at the University of Minnesota, and I'm working with practicing teachers and educators outside of schools when I'm working with TPT. So I get this amazing, lovely breadth of experience of, why I want to do this working with kids stuff. But I even see in the adults in the room, like, we tend to defer to male voices. And because I'm in science, I'm a science education professor, about half of our cohort each year identifies as male or female. And so it's roughly half almost every year. And so, but there are certain voices that we hear more often, and some voices that never speak up in class. And so we have lots of conversations about, like, let's witness what's happening in our circle, right? So this is a safe space for us to talk about this because we all know and have worked with each other now for months. But imagine now you're a 15-year-old in a 9th grade physical science class for the first time, right? And how comfortable do you feel in talking about projectile motion if you've never shot a Nerf gun, right? Like, you're using your Nerf gun as an example, right? But what are some other examples you can use so that everyone's voices can come to the table? Or not even just that, but what strategies can you use to validate everyone's voice? And so we talk a lot about the different strategies, both in classrooms, but also in the summer programming and the after school stuff too, where kids should get an opportunity to think first, what's my answer to this question? Right? And then maybe they even write it down.
Yeah.
So we call that Think Inc. I'm sure Nancy, you've heard this before, right? And then you pair up and you talk to somebody and you say, oh, Leah, this is what I'm thinking. What do you think? Right? Now we've shared our good ideas with each other. And now one of us in our partnership shares with the rest of the class. So we call it the Think Inc. pair share. Tips is the short word for that. But that's a great way to get everybody's voices heard. Maybe not to the large group,
Right.
but everybody's had a chance to share and think about it and voice their ideas and hear from others and weigh their ideas, right? Like this critical thinking piece is so important for interpreting and understanding STEM. So that's just, I mean, there's many in there in our resources that you could check out as well, but there's many different strategies that we need to keep in mind as adult educators. Don't assume kids know how to do this. They're great at talking to each other about what they're doing after school or this summer or after their program. They're less good about talking about science in meaningful ways because they just haven't had as much practice doing that. So they need some guidance. They need some support in that.
And one interesting thing that I've heard from a lot of teachers is since they've moved online, and many are moving back into the classroom right now, but since they've moved online, who they're hearing from and what is being said is changing. And in some ways that's, causing a lot of struggles for some youth. And in other ways, it's causing some youth that weren't flourishing before to flourish. So I hope that as we get back into maybe closer to what things looked like before. Yeah, whatever normal means.
It's a fake word at this point.
we can look at that and go, okay, what was I doing? And I think a lot of it is different ways of communicating that don't celebrate one type of communication, but celebrate multiple types. One more quick thing that Barb's story made me think of. The Girl Scouts of St. Croix Valley, who work in Minnesota and Wisconsin, do this amazing engineering camp. And one of the things they do is build a Rube Goldberg machine, which is, you try to make something do an action, but use as many steps as possible instead of, it's very the opposite of computer science. But one thing that they do is every time a group fails, they say something, I'm going to get this chant wrong, but it's like, 1, 2, 3, fail. And they do that over and over and over. So if there's 20 groups, you're just hearing fail all around, failure being celebrated all around the gym. And what that's teaching girls is failure is part of engineering. Failure is part of STEM. And that's necessary and something to be celebrated because it gets you one step closer to success.
All right, teary. I have got goosebumps from that.
I am also teary, and I'm just thinking of grad school life and how often I would yell fail. That are also just in the sense of like you're preparing for what these careers actually like really look like, and yeah, that learning, if you want to learn a lot and do a lot of new things, like you're going to fail a lot. And the process of bouncing back from failures or rejections or anything else and sort of putting them into context is so important. So I love that chant.
Yeah, my son had a female math teacher in middle school who had a very similar thing. She had a poster, she'd laminated this poster that she'd made, and I don't remember it likely. I'm never going to remember the chant. But whenever someone would say, I can't do this, like the whole class had to say, and, whatever it was, like, you can do it. Yes, you can. Right. So they had this, chant that they would do. And of course, it became something that the kids did, right? Instead of her needing to manage it. Because at first she would manage it. Okay, what do we say when someone says they can't do it? And she'd point to the sign. And then pretty soon it was just like, oh, right. They'd roll their eyes. Yeah, sorry, I didn't really mean I can't do it. I just mean I can't do it yet. Right?
I love those examples. I mean, it helps me and just to help internalize these goals that we all have for each other, to try to achieve. And to a much lesser extent, Ryan and I had, when we were working on our study, and just getting like technology problems, or it was raining while we were carrying our box of equipment, our saying would be, science.
Yeah, we were like, science. That was
science.
We still text each other like, science. Because it's like, that's the exciting thing that really keeps us motivated through all of the failure and troubles and everything else. So I love that you brought that up, Nancy.
Part of the mix. Part of the mix. And we have these common experiences across all four of us. And I did want to ask you, Barb, when I was looking things up about some of the work that you do, I know that you have had some international experience on these issues. And I'm wondering if you are seeing similar obstacles or different challenges elsewhere about trying to meet some of these goals that we all have here.
Yeah, this is definitely not the same in every community, right? Globally, the issues for women in STEM or girls in science is different in different places. There's some places where it's almost a non-issue, and other places where it's even harder, right? So, and I think one of the things that I like to emphasize when I do trainings or talk to teachers and practitioners is that now that we know this information about what works, and we know some of the causes are social, right? Social and cultural. Because if you look at math and science scores for girls and boys across this nation, they're very similar. Sometimes boys outscore girls a little bit, but like the differences are really becoming less and less important. Different, the probabilities are very different. But because it's social and cultural, I think that's actually good news, right? I mean, it sounds like, oh, how are we going to change the world, or how are we going to change this whole nation to everybody can think this way, right? But if we focus on what we have control over, right? It's our program, right? It's the program that you and Ryan organized, right? You had control over that. And we can set the social and cultural norms for our place in space. And so if we can focus on the stuff that we have control over, then we can say, we can have the poster that says, you can't say, I don't know how to do this, right? And then you have your chant. You can say that 1, 2, 3, fail or whatever. And it becomes it's the culture of the space. And it changes thinking in, the parameters where we have control. But you're right. It's not the same across the globe. There are differences in different places. Some, like I said, some it's harder, some it's not as hard for women. But I think because it's social and cultural, right? The pieces that work, if we can sort of focus in on, what does this group need? How can we make this group successful? Then that can have a ripple effect.
Well, I hope that the work that both of you do can at least be inspiring for others that aren't there where we are, even if some are further ahead of us in this arena. So hopefully just by spreading the word and the strategies and the materials that you guys were talking will help people know that there is something that can be changed, that we can improve, and things are changing over time. And then we can kind of nudge things along a little bit further. So I'm encouraged.
Absolutely. And it's not linear either. It's not like we are over here and other people are over here. It's we are swimming in this sea and someone else is too, and we have things we can learn from them and vice versa. So it's really exciting for me to do these sorts of talks, because now I'm like, oh, right, I have to get back to their study. I have to see what was it about the Kate video that we can employ more of our programs. So it's exciting. Yeah,
I'm glad you said that. I know we need to wrap up soon, but I want to get this question out for you, especially Leah. Like, are there things that you, and Barb as well, I'm sorry, that you wish that people were studying, or things that you wish researchers would actually ask you before they go and do their study? Like, what would you want to be asked?
What would I want to be
Yeah,
asked?
what do you want studied? What do you want to, like, what would you like to, to be measured, so to help you do the important work that you're doing?
I would like to be asked where in my practice do I feel the most insecure, or do I feel like I am not, where am I still dealing with a fixed mindset? Because that growth mindset piece is a struggle for adults as well as children. And as people are going through programs, there's a lot of excitement and fun, but also fear. And those unconscious biases that we all have lead into our programs with our kids. And I absolutely have, like, everyone has them. So I want people to figure out where, what are those points? What are those pieces that I might be doing that are going into the things I create, and that someone else is doing that are passing on ideas of what gender is to their students, so that we can stop and rectify them and get better.
That's great.
I'm asking for a question that I can't answer, and I know that, but it would be helpful.
And Barb, I know you're involved in doing some research, but do you have thoughts about this as well?
Yeah, and my question is also on the practitioner side, and rather than the girls' side right now. And that is maybe because I work mostly with adults, but there's this, as we know right now in our country, there are real issues around anti-racist behaviors and anti-women, anti-trans, right? Like, there's all kinds of ways that people identify, and it becomes, I think, difficult as a teacher to feel like you're meeting the needs of everyone in your room or in your space or in online. And so what are the strategies we can use to help educators feel more confident in the culturally relevant practices that they're trying, working with gender nonconforming students, working in STEM spaces that have access to all. So really thinking about how do I improve my practice as a practitioner in whatever teaching space that I do to meet the needs of my kids or the students that I'm working with. Because I think what we hear from teachers and educators of all kinds is that the hardest thing to do is to put these theoretical ideas into practice and feel good that we're moving in the right direction. But like Leah said a couple times, it's a journey, right? We're going to try it and it'll fail. When we celebrate it, right? And then we try something else and it fails, we celebrate. No, but we keep needing to try and figure out what works so that we continue to build our practice out rather than get stuck in the ways where, only the boys get heard, or only the kids with their hands up get heard, or only the ones who can answer the fastest get heard, or whatever those things are. So
that's fabulous. Thank you. Well, I know I've learned a lot from our conversation today, and I know we could probably talk some more. And I'm glad we got you guys together. I hear you haven't seen each other in a little bit. So this has been fantastic. We'd love to, if you had given us some information, if there's anything else you wanted to give a shout out that we should know about, that we would love to share that. And we are just so appreciative of your time, the work that you're doing as well. Ryan, you might want to close us out a little bit too, if you have any final thoughts.
Yeah, I think one of the big takeaways for me from today is I just really appreciate the flexible mindset that y'all have with your programming. And I think that that's something that like what you were saying, it's hard to admit when you're wrong, or admit when you're doing something that might be harmful to someone else, but you haven't necessarily realized it, right? And I think just sort of developing that mindset is something that I am trying to do as well, of like developing that mindset of just learning and being open and flexible and knowing that like some things are going to work, some things aren't. And it's not like a comment on you as a person or anything like that. And it's more like you just have to be adaptive. And I think that especially in the work that y'all are doing, I'm just seeing how incredibly important that sort of flexibility. And I mean, I think it's a level of selflessness too, right? Or just like putting yourself behind the goals of the program and things like that. So I just really appreciate, like Nancy was saying, your time and the insights here, especially.
It's really humbling to work with youth, right? Like they teach us so much. And I can screw up several times a week and I just come back each day and say, thank you for teaching me something new, right? I learned something today. And I hope that students can model that in their own lives, right? I do it with my teachers all the time. I tell you, teaching teachers how to teach science is the best sort of metacognitive practice every single day. Okay, here's what never to do. Don't do what I just did, right? So teaches me a lot.
We'll definitely call you on things. Sometimes, sometimes things with your practice, sometimes things like, why do you have dots on your face? That's the younger ones. But so I think that as far as ego, working with young people is an ego check for sure. And I love it. It's very helpful.
Man, well, I really appreciate all of your time and the resources that SciGirls has put together. So I'm just going to plug that scigirlsconnect.org again, and just encourage anyone watching to really check that out and use the resources that are there and reach out to SciGirls to collaborate on different programs and things like that. Because I think this mentality of learning from a lot of different organizations and groups and programs and adjusting the programs accordingly is so beneficial for all of us.
And I'll mention everything is free on SciGirls Connect. We do not feel the need to own it. So we have things like logo guidelines, but however you want to implement the things that you see there, you can. You can download things, you can email us, just whatever works for you and the situation that you're.
That's great. And that reminds us of our generosity, your generosity of just getting us started in the very beginning, and to be able to use a SciGirls episode for our research was profound. And it was literally a breakthrough for us. We were at a stuck point, and that was a breakthrough. So thank you for your generosity, right? Thank you so much, and we will be in touch. Thanks again for all your time, and we loved our conversation with you. Thanks.
Thanks for inviting us. It was lovely.
Absolutely.